Y'all ready to be history?
Get started.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
Thanks to TriBooth, the best vocal booth for home or on-the-road voice recording. And Austrian Audio, making passion heard. Introducing Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone Audio Post, Chicago. Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Radio Imaging, Sydney. Tech to the VO Stars, George the Tech Whittam from LA. And me, Andrew Peters, voiceover talent and home studio guy.
Line up, ladies! Here we go.
And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite. This is part 2 of our chat with Jim Edgar. Off for another ramble into the hedges and beyond, I'm sure. Thanks to TriBooth. Don't forget the code TRIPAP200. That will get you $200 off your TriBooth. Use the code and enjoy the TriBooth. They're very good, you know. And Austrian Audio, making passion heard. You're working with people coming into the industry, and this was something that sent me right off the Richter scale a couple of weeks ago. I saw it's on a Facebook, thread of some voiceover community thing, and there was a person who was setting up in fact, the things it said, "My husband built me a studio." Well, I'll describe exactly what the picture showed me. It showed me inside a closet, a metal shoe rack with a USB mic on it and a laptop.
Okay.
And no treatment.
Yeah.
My husband built me a studio.
But what kind of shoes were they?
I was going to say
Birkenstocks. They were Birkenstocks.
I'm sure her husband performs well in other endeavors.
It's funny, I take a different view. I kind of look, it's like we all start somewhere. We all start innocently. We all go, hey, this is all it takes. Cool. And as you move forward through your career, you learn, it's like you understand that maybe that's not right. So, I mean, is a shoe rack a voice booth? Of course it's not. But at the same time, fuck, we all start somewhere. I thought the first 30-second commercial I made with a few sound effects in it was the greatest thing ever. And then someone went, actually, you've got two voiceovers going at the same time. Would I do that now? Of course not. But back then it was like, fuck, check out this great effect on the voiceover. It's like... Nice. I don't know.
At least you're in a professional studio.
But that's the thing. Their learning curve is the studio. That's the...
Yeah, but it's not a studio. And this is the point. It's like terminology and, what your expectations are. If you think I'm going to be a voice actor and then you sit there staring at a pair of Birkenstocks on a steel shoe rack, do you turn up with plastic toolkit when you're a tradie? I don't think so.
No, you don't, because as a tradie, you know better. But if you're starting out, you don't know better.
Well, maybe you should know better. So on that topic, Jim, what's the worst thing you've ever seen as far as someone starting up?
Well, I was told, I think I get my second or first class, that all I needed was a snowball. It was this thing I could just plug into my computer, and I bought one and I plugged it in. And I said, oh, I guess that's weird, because I thought audio quality mattered. But again, I'd heard, I'd had some experience. I knew that, what stuff should or could sound like. I think what gets people into trouble is that they think they just are going to do something once and never have to correct it. And so again, kind of along the lines of making them aware of the sounds is imparting this idea that it's going to be an iterative process, that your space is going to sound better next year because you're going to continually refine it, that you're going to get better at noticing problems. You're going to get better at listening to issues. I have all sorts of photos from students who were saying, hey, would this work? And it's the same. It's kind of like that. I mean, here's a big metal, copy stand and it's in a drywalled closet that, has, 1-by-1 piece of foam in it. It's like, that's not going to work. But I've seen these, I share my first space, which was ugly. I had to record in the hallway of this house, and I would never show that to a client. I never showed it to my agent, but my sound was good. The resonances were controlled. There was no reflection. It was, on mic and present, but it looked uglier than hell, and it was back, in the late aughts of this century, before anybody was doing all the look at me in my studio kind of thing. I mean, my big thing right now is I think that a lot of people get sold a bill of goods with foam, that I think foam is one of the most overprescribed solutions to solving a space, because everybody goes searches on, again, a major internet retailer and finds the little 1-inch, cheap foam, and they put that in their closet, and they spend way too much money, and they use way too caustic. They wallpaper it through, and then they wonder why it sounds like everything sounds like this the whole time. So
have you ever seen people wrap foam around the mic stand?
I have.
Literally around the whole pole of the mic stand. I've seen that.
Let me ask you, and I guess, George, you fall into this too, so maybe both of you might have an input on this. I was sort of forced into a situation where I had to use a sort of, let's call it bottom of the rung voiceover provider agency here in Australia last week for a community radio station client of mine who don't have the money to pay, $300 for a 30-second commercial because they're charging their client $200. But I got sent this voiceover. The voiceover booth was obviously under the stairs somewhere because it had that really hollow, yucky sound. And then they obviously tried some noise reduction, and the noise reduction threshold wasn't low enough. So occasionally there was, this noise kicking in, and it was just horrible. But the point I make, right, is that yes, the voiceover talent should be responsible for that, but then also it came through their agent and then to me. So the question I have is for them was, are you not giving your voiceover feedback that, hang on a sec, this isn't right, I need you to redo it. But the question for you two that comes for me from that is, do you find when people come from you that people will say, I've had a client tell me this, or someone else has told me that about my recording, or is it purely just people going, this is the problem I'm experiencing? Because to me, there's some sort of responsibility on people who are receiving these shit files to go, you need to sort this out. And I don't know that that's happening.
Yeah, I think there's anybody who's going to deal with that until it's way down the line and no one is able to re-record because it's all done.
I'd say there's a third option, which is a lot of people come to me saying, I'm not sure my stuff is good enough. And I think that's the right perspective on it. That they kind of know they have to sound good, but they just don't have the vocabulary for it. They don't have, they know it's wrong. I mean, by the time, we're hitting 20 or whenever we're starting to go into voiceovers, we've ingested a lot of material. We kind of know what things should sound like. And we know that, that echoey thing, if we pay any attention to it whatsoever, or if we've got that horrifically muffled thing, we know it doesn't sound right. We just don't know how to get from A to B. So I get a lot of people who say, I'm going to start applying to agents and I want to make sure my sound is good. And, and if they're folks I haven't worked with before, or I know George has had this too, you have to say, no, it's not. Whoever told you this is good lied to you.
What do you mean my Blue Yeti's not good enough? What are you talking about?
I've heard a good Yeti on your show. So
well, there is
the one Yeti out of the 50,000, 500,000 they made.
That's right.
But it's, I had this happen with a client the other day. They're an audiobook narrator. They were trying to get some work. They're instituting some workflow things. And, I just said, hey, have you ever tried moving your mic slightly? And they did. And I'd never seen a picture of their space, and it sounded horrifically bad. And they sent me a photo of their space, and they have a reflection shield and some weird panels around it. And they had found the only place in their tiny little closet that it sounded good. And by moving the mic 2 inches to the right, all of a sudden we were getting comb filtering and all sorts of weird stuff back. So we had to move everything back where we started because the space didn't allow for it. It was just a little, 2x2, you're under the stairs place, which they'd managed to make sound good, but
they lucked into it. Probably
they lucked into it. I would say. Well, yeah, I think they did. But that's the sort of thing. Again, I preach in a lot of the stuff I post is that it's always going to be an iterative process. That if you think you're done, you're not. When everybody had to suddenly start doing stuff out of the house, there were a legion of people who were suddenly using Source Connect who suddenly weren't going into the local studio. And, they were saying, hey, this isn't going to work. Now, in our area, they definitely listen to your audio before you get signed. They say, we want to sample from your space. Yeah. I think most agents, of value will, set the bar high enough that you can actually, that they'll actually test your audio. Yeah,
it's clearly clearly this agent wasn't listening. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, we've got it. Here we go. Forward it on to the client. Perfect.
Well, they probably listen through their laptop speakers too. That's the other thing.
Well, then the interesting thing for me was it wasn't like, oh shit, we screwed up. Here's your audio. We'll get it done straight away. It was like, oh, we'll redo it. It'll be back to you tomorrow. It's like, well, hang on, I need this now. It's like, anyway.
It's going to air tonight, so tomorrow won't really work.
It's okay. I've only got a client who was expecting to have it today because you promised me the audio today, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
I love the session that seems to happen once a year where someone hooks up on Source Connect, records, and then finds out later from the engineer or the other side that it's not good enough. And the classic mistake is not selecting your main microphone in Source Connect because of whatever, like, you unplugged your Scarlett and then you launched Source Connect, so it found the only thing it could find, which was the built-in microphone. So you see the meter bouncing. You think it's good. You connect with someone who should be saying, like, uh-oh. And instead, they're just like, do a whole session and then go, hey, do you like the good audio? And the actor's like, what you talking about? And
that's sort of unconscionable from the engineer's point of view.
Marching ahead.
That's what they're doing. That's what they should be doing, is listening for that.
It's amazing that it happens, but yes.
Yeah. It's like when you're doing sessions and they're actually monitoring on Zoom and you're capturing the audio at your end.
Right, and they just assume you're good.
Absolutely fraught with danger, because you don't really know what you're going to receive. So,
or you come out and you didn't hit record. It's like,
there's that as well.
Oops.
Yeah. Or you look around and it's actually stopped or crashed.
All good.
Yeah, all of the above.
Or I'm a voiceover and not an engineer.
Well, but that's all the stuff that we've been asked to do increasingly in the last 5 years. That wasn't. That wasn't as expected as I think it is now. So, again, much like we have to keep reinventing and asking ourselves, is our space competitive? Is our gear competitive? We need to know enough technically that we don't do things like that.
I wonder if there ever was a reality where back when ISDN was still happening and voiceover talent were kind of using the ISDN capability as a sort of club against each other, like, well, you don't even have to hire a studio because I have my ISDN, and that culture of a talent not charging for their studio. And I just wonder if there was ever an alternate universe where talent are allowed to have their fee for being a talent, and then if they're expected to do the recording, God forbid, actually present it with, anything more than one long file, where you're separating files or even doing edits. And the talent should be paid for being the engineer that they're forced to become, in a way, on some level. But it's like, it just never happened.
And it never will now, because it's never happened in the beginning.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
It would take an alternate universe at this point.
I mean, you look at the investment, if you're serious about, even if you're keeping it to the bare minimum, the investment as a voice actor.
$10,000.
Yeah. If you're doing it properly,
right, it's $10,000.
Yeah.
You get
at least,
easily $500 in a microphone and another $500 in a preamp and a couple thousand in a booth, probably, by the time you're done messing with it, if at least, or treating a closet for. I mean, George, what's the least you could treat a closet for? Maybe like $400.
Yeah. $200 to $400. Yeah.
Yeah, but is that quiet on demand, or is that I can get away with it between these hours when my neighbor is not idling their Harley?
If the neighbor's not in the shower.
Exactly.
Neighbor upstairs.
No, I would say quiet on demand. You're probably not even getting close unless you're spending probably like $2,000.
You can either spend minimal on your booth and a lot on Quaaludes that you can give to the dog next door. Or,
in my pre-flight list, we have a terrier here at the house, and my pre-flight list is close the shades in the front of the house, because if she sees somebody walking in front of us, she'll start barking, and it doesn't quite come through my booth, but I can hear it enough that it's like I know it's there. And it just
Here in Evanston, they banned gas leaf blowers.
Did they really?
Oh, really?
They did that in my area. Unfortunately, we're in an unincorporated area, which doesn't follow the city regulations. But they did that in L.A. too. That passed, didn't it, George?
Santa Monica, at least.
Yeah, Santa Monica did.
Not L.A. I live in L.A. and trust me, they did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm guilty as charged on the petrol blower. So guilty as charged. It works better than anything else.
A brush cutter and
lawnmower.
Lawnmower.
Yeah, but I mean,
well, you need to develop a suite of plugins, Robbo, that are specifically designed to tune out your.
This one does the Ryobi. This one does the Makita. This one does the.
There we go.
Yeah,
there we go.
Exactly.
You retire off that.
Totally.
In each country, because of the different frequencies of the power.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, you could have the waves still.
Yeah, you could refine it. Yeah.
Isotope, Makita.
No, I just need one that drowns out my
really
wife, and I'll be fine.
Leaf blower.
Yeah, that's right.
To make a leaf blower
that's called earplugs.
Proof booth, I think you're spending some serious coin, or at least putting a lot of time and a lot of trips into Home Depot. But it's going to be a construction, and it's a commitment, and a lot of people still kind of treat this as like this side job, and they're just going to clear out half their closet, and they might get a few gigs, and some people end up with a quiet closet, but in certain places it's hard. I mean, New York City.
Yeah.
Or
I was going to say that. Yeah.
But having said that, there are plenty of talent in New York City that get it right too, though.
There are.
Yeah, but the trouble is, if you're living in apartments,
they were the heaviest geographic area that was reaching out in the first months of the pandemic, because they were all going into studios. I mean, I know plenty of working union talent who were still doing iPhone auditions in New York City and then going in, for the work. That idea that we have to do this here, that's very different. I think
there's this place in New York City. Actually, we throw a party at the AES convention but basically it's a really interesting story. So there's this big post house, and they had all these serious booths, like the metal ones that are they're like $30,000 each. I don't know if you've seen those types of industrial acoustic design booths. Is one company that makes them. They're so insanely heavy.
Those are the ones that you float in water, or that's different? That's like a nice.
No, these are the wall panels are made out of metal, and one 4x whatever 8-foot wall panels 400 pounds. Once you own one, if you're not using it, it's just a burden. So essentially, this post house goes out of business. They've got something 10 or more of these things, and they've got to they got to clear out the building. It's going to cost them thousands of dollars to get rid of them. So VoxPod comes in and says, "Hey, we'll buy them we'll get rid of them for you." They get them all for basically the price of getting rid of them, and they put them in this place. And so talent and podcasters and whoever, because it's New York, it's all very walkable. They just have this 10 booths, each one with a microphone and a Mac and everything you need. And you kind of have a membership, and you can just have a completely seriously pro setup. And it's like going to the club, going to the gym.
Yeah. Interesting. Actually, talking of that, Cunningham's in LA, when you go there, they've got the same thing with that whole row of booths in a huge room. It's probably about the same 6'10" or whatever it is in a space. It's massive.
Yeah.
Massive.
You can do that in a big city where the commute is not as bad as the construction and the cost. Because the right gig, you're going to make your money back on that gig.
Well, the good thing about New York in that respect is that people do tend to walk or jump on the subway. I mean, it's a much easier city if you're going to do that, because everything is accessible.
Exactly.
If you live in Manhattan,
there's only a few cities in the world you can get away. I don't even LA would be kind of hard to get away with that because it's so spread out.
I think, Robert, I think your use of the phrase "kind of hard" is understating significantly.
Yeah,
that you'll spend an hour going 2 miles.
In Aussie parlance, it's fucking impossible. Right.
Yeah. Well, it's the same as Melbourne and Sydney. It's just a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Now, Jim, you also, as we mentioned before, you do teaching. So what's the company and where is it based?
Well, I do most of my classes through Voice One, which is located in San Francisco, but most of the classes are online. So they do some they have an in-person facility kind of near the waterfront in San Francisco. But a good portion of their classes are also available to anybody who has internet. And then I do my own stuff, kind of like George. I'll do little webinars on Twisted Wave or other stuff through my justaskjimvo.studio site, which has been around. I know Robbo and I have kind of fighting Just Ask monikers. But
I got to be honest. I never knew until until I kind of went, oh, shit.
That's all right. It was one of those things where, I kind of backed into this. It was one of those things where I was doing voiceover and people were saying, hey, I need to set up a home studio. And so it's like, okay, we'll do that. And then like the third person called me up and said, well, so-and-so said I should just ask Jim. It's like, oh, I love alliteration. So that's where that came from. So well, that's all right.
I can see my new company name.
Don't ask Andrew. Yeah, exactly.
Ask Andrew anything.
Ask somebody else.
Andrew the man. Exactly.
Ooh, I like that.
So how did you, I'm interested because you said you got into voiceover in 2007.
Yeah. What
were you doing before?
I worked, I did a lot of retail work. I was managing stores. I was in the bike business for a while. I did marketing and in-store display
merchandising.
Well, we had 13 stores, and so it was more getting stuff together, sending it out, and then calling all our stores to make sure they put them up, which is actually kind of one of the early.
Are those called planograms?
They are called planograms, but there are these things called lazy store managers that you need to call up and say, hey, the sale is tomorrow. We need to have that stuff up. But it was kind of like one of the early times when, I mean, honestly, growing up, all my closest friends were animated characters, so I kind of always, I think, was destined to do this. But I had called up, I was on store number 10, told them, hey, this is, happening this weekend, and make sure you get all your trainings in order, and everything has to be this way. Went to the next store to call them, and I got, somebody said, hey, so-and-so at store 10's calling you back. It's like, what's happening? And the guy just lit into me, and he said, look, if you don't care what you're talking about to me, just don't even bother. And he just went on, it's like, wow, that's interesting. And it sort of made me realize that, the excitement in my voice and the energy in my voice was very much a component of the message that I was trying to put across. And so it was like, light bulb number 1 goes on. And then my wife, not too long after that, gave me a little weekend voiceover class because I think she was kind of tired of our dogs singing and talking to each other a lot in public.
Wait a minute, you had a wife while you worked in the bike industry?
Oh yeah, I did.
Wow.
Yeah. No, we go back quite a ways actually. But no, it was one of those things where, I kept, I'd like see this thing about voiceover. It's like, man, I got to do that. And never did. And then she, for actually one of my birthdays said, hey, little 2-hour class, learn about voiceover. It's like, oh, okay, here's the gateway drug. And I walked into that class and it was like coming home, and I knew I needed to do it.
Isn't it funny?
And so, started investing, I didn't have an acting background. I didn't know it. Well, I'll argue that retail is really improv every day. So I think I had a lot of improv training. But
I agree. Yeah. I totally agree.
But, hit classes pretty hard and, got my skills together and started doing some work directly, and then got signed with the local agency, Stars agency here in San Francisco, and kind of was doing both the retail gig, and at that point I'd moved into the kind of more outdoor industry, kind of general outdoor retail stores. And so I was the boss, so I could come in late. I could give myself the afternoon off for sessions, which was nice. And then eventually made the jump full time. And it was kind of in the middle of that, again, Stars, told their roster, it's like, you can't come into the studio anymore to do auditions. And so all these people were suddenly saying, how do I do this? And
did they say that before the pandemic?
In 2007, for like the first couple of classes, one of the pitches from the teachers was, when you go into your agency to audition, go find a quiet corner, because you have to, you'll be have all sorts of distractions. And then about 3 months later, they stopped saying it, and the word got around. It's like, no, they just told all their talent that they have to figure out how to do auditions at home. And so I think the Bay Area was early in that. I know
was going to say they were pioneering on that.
Yeah. LA agencies were still bringing people in right up to the pandemic, I think, in some cases.
Some were, yeah. It was interesting because when I went there, I'd never seen that before. And I was visiting agencies, and particularly in LA, you walk in and there were booths there. And engineers. And I'm like, what? This is bizarre.
I mean, for the session,
really
you're talking about for the auditions.
For the auditions, yeah. No,
but the sessions were happening in person, or were they also, because, I'm not sure when, but certainly by 2010 or 15, it's like especially being in Chicago. So if you're in LA or New York, you're doing a lot of local sessions. There's a lot of talent there. But in Chicago, there's talent here, but it just began to be mostly remote sessions many years ago. You know, to the point where it's like you almost could get away with, if you wanted to, having a mixed studio with no booth, because like most of your talent is just remote.
Interesting. Yeah. We definitely had. You know, I would say we started seeing more remote sessions locally, but we'd still be going into, you know, Polarity Post or One Union, or even, you know, Stars had their booth still, which had an ISDN connection. So if you booked something for that, you'd go into the agency to record it, but it would be remote. But I don't think the expectation was there. I mean, I got Source Connect 2 or 3 years before the pandemic because, you know, I kind of knew that there were a bunch of auditions I wasn't getting because I didn't have Source Connect. And so as soon as I got that, it was like I was seeing different opportunities than I was before I got it. And then when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh, you know, everybody else now needs to do this. So that's...
Did you go more remote than local before the pandemic, or did it really take the pandemic to push that over the edge?
I think it was a harder sell for a lot of producers. I mean, you know, I think the expectation was we're going to go to the studio and the talent will be there. And, you know, I would push a lot of times like, hey, we can do this remotely. And, you know, one out of 10 that had planned to go in person might say, yeah, let's do that. That's, you know, that'll work. It got turned up to 11 when the pandemic hit.
You could always tell the session by the time it was booked during the day, whether they would accept you working remotely or dragging you in. And it would be either late morning, lunchtime, or afternoon drinks. So if you're going to be called in the studio, there's going to be free food, free drinks. If you know it's one of those time slots, you're going in no matter what. Right. If it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, no one wants to be there. You can work from home.
I would say that there's data to support that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the lunch bill, I think, for most of the sessions I used to do years ago was probably more than I got paid.
And then there was the cocaine on top of that.
Yeah. Well, that was radio. But it's funny you talked about the sales thing, because I do remember when I got into radio as a on-air DJ. It took me a while to click, but I was in retail before that, so I did a few years in selling stuff. And it clicked one day, and it was because there's a guy here who was a talkback kind of host who had a syndicated show across Australia. And one day I was listening and I thought, you know what? This guy is probably the best salesman in Australia. Because everyone thinks of him being a radio personality, but he's actually a really good salesperson. And that's why he's so big. And then you click. It's like, yeah, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm selling stuff, whether it's selling a record I'm about to play or a promo we're doing, whatever, you're actually selling it.
I think we have, you know, a great detector as a listener that we recognize when people are trying to push us to stuff. And so, you know, I was always kind of a little more pulled back on the sales floor. There were definitely people who were, you know, out in their face and going to make their commission and going to sell that extra stuff. And, you know, I was just always confident that's like, hey, I'm going to tell you what it is. We're going to have
more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, you know, one of the things that helped my transition into voiceover. I didn't have to undo that real hard sell kind of AM radio voice or anything like that.
Do you know who Dave Pasquesi is?
I've heard the name. I don't know.
So back in like the late 90s, and we would do a lot of McDonald's spots and be like, McDonald's. And he could read anything, like he just didn't give a crap about it. But he had a way of really it was bizarre. Like he didn't give a crap, but it was cool because I don't know. It was just, and we used to always joke about that because he would just come in and be like, yeah, McDonald's. And the clients would be like, oh, that's amazing. It's like, he just threw it off. Like,
you think it's him to blame for this, like, toss it away? They call it the throwaway read.
Yeah. The throwaway read, the unannouncer read.
Well, that's the whole man next door sort of thing, which was born out of, you know, people being bombarded with advertising. You can't watch YouTube without being advertised at. You can't turn on the TV, the radio. You can't do this. You can't listen to a podcast without being advertised to. So the whole idea was with the man next door read is sell me without selling me. So say, you know,
exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's what it's born of. It's born of the fact that there's just so much out there where mentally we just switch off. You know,
we're real good at noticing that fake. And so
totally.
That's,
we're being scammed in our emails. So, anything else that's trying to sell to us now gets lumped into that scam sort of "don't sell me, I'm over it" sort of attitude.
Well, I should end this episode by saying, try this, get one. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Hey, listen if you want. We don't really care.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite, with thanks to TriBooth and Austrian Audio, recorded using Source Connect, edited by Andrew Peters and mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging, with tech support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.